Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CGC HQ, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's Ask Me Anything webinar. This is the first Ask Me Anything we've done this year so far, and we have another one scheduled in September. But this one I think is going to be really interesting. We got a lot of great questions in already, so I know you guys are ready to jump to it. But before we get started, just want to go over a couple housekeeping details. Today we are recording, so if you need to leave or duck out, that's fine. We'll send you the recording tomorrow and it'll come to you in an email directly from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. Also want you to submit any questions that you have in the chat at any time. I mean, we did get a lot of your questions pre-submitted, but we're always going to be happy to take more, so put them in as you have them, and we'll keep an eye on those and try to ask as many as we can. All right, so I'm going to just briefly introduce everyone that we have today. We unfortunately, we do not have Thomas Charlton from Goliath. He had an emergency pop up and couldn't be with us today, so apologies. But we do have Blair Parkhill. He's the Director of Products at Login BSI. We also have Jarian Gibson, Staff Solution Architect and CTP at Nutanix. And we have Josh Travers, the Senior Director of Worldwide Customer Success at Remo3. And then leading us all through this discussion is a CGC BFF, Patrick Coble. He's our Nashville CGC leader and a CTP. And with that, I'm gonna duck out and disappear, and I'll let Patrick take over and get us going. So I'll be back later.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone for coming. I think we're supposed to talk about DAS, is what it sounds like. You know, I'm looking at these piles of questions, and it pretty much all goes around that. So, you know, let's see. Let's just pick one out of the DAS pile here. You know, I think. I think the hardest part for me and most clients is how many people are y'all all working with that are moving to the cloud, and then do you see anybody moving back? Because I know sometimes, especially with COVID in 2020, it was like, you know, there was chip shortages, server shortages, endpoint shortages, and it was just like send people home any which way you can, VDI for the win. And now it's like, that cloud bill's getting a little expensive, or application X isn't as fast. What are y'all kind of seeing when people moving to a cloud solution, and then if they think they're going to have to move back? Because I think those are connected at the hip, because I see it.
I guess I'll start, since I'm more on the infrastructure side here on the call. So I think first we need to start by saying, let's define what they're saying by cloud, because that can mean a couple things, right? So some it's a cloud control plane, which is typically associated with DAS. Some is full-on control or full-on cloud infrastructure. So let's address the cloud infrastructure one. So what I saw is when the pandemic first started, and the shift from butts and seats in the office to working from home started, there was that big shift of how do we account for this increased capacity in our environment. So there was a lot of bursting into the cloud for some of those use cases. So in my experience, it's been more of a hybrid cloud approach, more for a bursting and disaster recovery use case, because they may not have the gear on-prem for that increased capacity. They may not want to own anymore and manage any more DR locations. They're using it for DR. We even had some customers said, hey, we're going to go all into cloud, and because of the cost and complexity, they kind of brought things back into the data center and went more hybrid for certain workloads. So I guess what comes down to is, one, what's the use case you're going to use for it? Is it temporary? Is it full-time? I'm seeing it more as a temporary one in my experience. And then two, what requirements in data gravity come into play as well, because you always want to make sure they're close to that data and the backend application. So are you seeing some workloads go in the cloud because they're more SaaS based, or or more cloud-based applications. Those traditional workloads, they have the applications in the data center. The data has to be in the data center. Those are kind of more shifting back because they want that better user experience in that locality to those back-end resources.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm with Yarian on that. I do think it's important to kind of draw the delineation between the work from home COVID response, and that just being kind of a knee-jerk reaction to be able to compensate for a lot of deficiencies that maybe they had in their on-prem solution. So I get like coming back after that. But from kind of a strategy perspective, I'm really not seeing a lot of customers that have been in the cloud long enough to say, hey, we don't like this, we're going back, right? I think we're still in the early days of them really researching how it's going to behave for them, how it's going to work for them, especially in the larger enterprise, where a move like this takes a lot more investment and a lot more time. So I'd say it's kind of tough to answer that question wholeheartedly, just because there really isn't a lot of information coming back that says, hey, we're ditching cloud because of this. But I think from a work from home, remote perspective, the world's changed, and it's definitely going to have something to do with people moving to the cloud or to a cloud in that respect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Seeing a lot of the hybrid approach, specifically around the applications. There's various, as we all know, there's various different ways to deploy those applications. It's not one silver bullet. Again, I would agree. I don't really see much of moving to the cloud fully and then moving back. It's a lot of the time we spend is in the planning phases of that initial move to the cloud. But there's always, again, various application deployment strategies in play.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the control plane move to the cloud has been a good alternative for a lot of people to get off of managing a lot of systems, because if you mess with any VDI system, then pretty much some of the most important thing is that image, right? The applications, its performance, the user performance, everything. So where you run it is going to directly affect that. And I think Remo 3 for the application side and Login BSI for the testing side are like in the catbird seats for each one of those to help you know, is it going to work? Is it better or worse, right? Versus just like double click for the win and hope for the best, right? Like, let's just install it there. It's slower, feels slower. I don't really know, so, and then moving the workload to the cloud, then yeah, definitely a big deal, because to everyone's point, you got to be close to that backend application, that data. Otherwise your user performance is going to suffer. And if that suffers, then that kills the whole project, right? Because it's like, why would we move somewhere it's going to be worse, right? And in some cases more expensive too, right? If we're actually hosting workloads somewhere. So we had another one come in, and this is from Chris here. Do you see the enterprise level business moving from on-premise private cloud, right, in your data center, to solutions like Azure, or do you see it more small and medium business? I know for me, I've got a good chunk of small, medium, and very large enterprise clients that are at least looking at it, or have a couple hundred to a couple thousand people in a hosted Citrix cloud solution, a VMware cloud solution, and even a couple in Frame, and then a couple in AVD. And so, I mean, what's everyone's kind of experience there when we talk about like the size of businesses that are looking at it?
I'm seeing across the board, and I work a lot with our Nutanix Cloud Clusters product that can go into Azure and AWS just using our native stuff. So I'm bare metal. So I'm seeing sizes across the board, whether it's a bursting or DR use cases, but those are the two I'm seeing for that. I do come across some who are looking at native AVD. That seems to be getting a lot of traction out there, or even native Citrix in the cloud as well. But for most of my stuff, I'm working with Nutanix Cloud Clusters and the different cloud providers for bursting and disaster recovery, all sizes.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's large enterprise, and they're pretty much in the investigation phase where they're looking at either 1,000, 2,000 seats. There are some very large ones that we've seen as well, but for the most part, they're kind of breaking off a piece of their user set to see how well it would adjust moving to the cloud, but they're also testing for that move as well. So yeah, nobody has wholeheartedly moved their infrastructure to cloud as far as I've seen. It doesn't even look like they're considering it. So it sounds like we're kind of on the path to this hybrid, style, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's across the board as well. I think, fundamentally, because regardless of the size of the organization, everyone has applications. When we're looking at, fundamentally changing how we're delivering those applications, how we're managing those, a lot of risk with that. So yeah, again, whether it's small, medium, or large enterprise, we're having those discussions.
Yeah, and I mean, just to even take a pause before we go to the next question, I think, Blair, on your side with Login VSI, I would think that you guys would be being brought in for the old days. I remember when Login VSI was cooking, it was like, how much harder is Windows 7 versus Windows XP, and then Windows 7 versus Windows 8 for a brief second, and then the Windows 10 and Vista and everything else. So to find those differences, so I'm sure there's a lot of people that are bringing in Login VSI for that exact use case, like camera 1, camera 2, better or worse, right? Like eye doctor appointment, like flipping the lenses, like is it better or worse, And so you speak to that a little bit, because I'm sure that's a use case that's been emerging as cloud solutions, and hosting your workload somewhere other than your data center has become more and more popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, the use case that you're talking about is almost classic for us by this point, right? That's a given. I'm going to test anything that I'm moving or upgrading, or even patches, things like that. But when it comes to this whole DaaS world and cloud available solutions like Azure or some of the others, I think where I'm seeing some of our customers who are looking at lifting up from on-prem and kind of bridging into cloud, they're actually doing testing of things like their laptops with our product now. So for example, I'm going to test an endpoint that most of them have, a laptop that most of my end users have. I'm going to characterize the performance of that endpoint, and then I'm going to compare that to what they're getting from the cloud, right? So the use case here is, okay, they're used to this, we're going to move them to the cloud, but we have to give them an as good or better experience if they're going to stick to it, right? So the cool use case that we've seen lately is, yeah, let's do a test on this laptop and see how that responds, see how the scoring that we provide characterizes that experience. Let's take that same experience to the cloud and see how that works, right? So that one has really been more of the cloud-based, analysis that some of our customers have done versus the, kind of let's compare, Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session with a Windows 10 single session, that kind of stuff. So it's gotten very interesting here.
Yeah, and I mean, Josh, on y'all side at Remo 3, I mean, it's all about like application compatibility, that automated testing, finding out if something's going to work or if it's just going to explode if you just double click it. So can we talk about that a little bit and some of the stuff? Because I know for you, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's on site or in the data center, application's an application on a Windows operating system, and taking a gander at it and figuring out what's underneath the hood to find out what problems you may run into.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about when you identify those problems as well, right? The earlier, the better, the pre-production assessment type phase. Certainly to have those informative insights up front, it really helps shape and define what that, migration story looks like as it relates to the application. And really what we're trying to solve is, if we're going to change the environment on-prem, in the cloud, patch, update, what does that impact as it relates to the application? Right? Is it going to break it? Is it going to compromise the user's experience? Those are the informative insights that we're delivering up front. And the other piece of that, right? We talk a lot about, okay, how do I get from point A to point B? But once you reach point B, how are you effectively managing those applications on what I like to call the day-to-day operational change management, right? So if we move our apps to the cloud, there's regular updates, right? There's occurrences that happen that potentially could impact those applications. So that's kind of the second piece of the story. A lot of the conversations we have is how to initially move, but once we get there, how do we maintain that as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, and that thing there is, what have you seen on that side is, what is that best practice for that application testing? Because I know, the world kind of revolves around like Patch Tuesday, and really I think what a lot of people forget now is Microsoft is kind of doing a double whammy every month, right? So we have security updates on one Tuesday, and then supplemental updates and cumulative updates and everything else on the next Tuesday. So we basically got 2 punches each month. One you need to do, one you should do, but based on the cadence of those, your application testing and making sure those things work is changing a whole lot more. It's not like let's just test it once every operating system, which I've seen over the past like 20 years. We never knew it worked in 2008 R2 from 2003 until we double clicked it. Same thing with 2012, 2016, 2019, and now 2022, right?
No, absolutely, and that's the value that automation and orchestration brings into that process, right? And it's understanding again what your current process is. Typically, that's manual. You introduce the automation element, you can now start to create different or additional entry points into that application lifecycle. So we no longer just have to test every time a major patch comes out. If we've simplified it, we're using compute versus manual human effort, then that now becomes a click of the mouse or a scheduled task. So we can then start to really automate that testing in terms of best practice on any change that's being introduced or proposed. So again, I like to draw it out kind of on a life cycle. We can then start to add those additional entry points for testing because again, we're doing it a lot more efficiently than how it's been done traditionally in the past.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because we all know one of the things that's accelerated cloud is just automation in general, right? And that is what makes or breaks it, because if you're going to go there and it's more complicated, who wants to do that, right? We already have enough problems in our own data centers, and we've tried to automate our way out of it. And the cloud, in some cases, does give you an easier platform to do it. As a security nerd, then there's other implications you got to pay attention to for your root users and your admin tenants and stuff like that too. But let's go to another one here. So I think we already covered this one. It says, how does the move to Citrix Cloud aid and present more challenges to optimizing a user's logon performance? And I think what we talked about a little bit ago is what I've seen with people that have moved to Citrix Cloud is they get more time to focus on the image and the apps and the users, because that's really their job at that point. They don't have to worry about the storefront servers, the delivery controllers, the SQL database, the license server. Those things are hosted and taken care of for you. So then it's really like your Citrix gateway and however you're doing it, and then your images. So is everyone does that sound similar?
Yep.
All right, sweet. And then this one's a good one too. And I think this goes back to multi-session with desktop operating systems, right? So one of them is how to handle multi-session VDIs for resource-intensive users. When I think about that, it's like multi-user, I just think of RDS, but now we have a new flavor. And have y'all seen that flavor of ice cream being dispensed anywhere?
Oh yeah, for sure. And if you're talking about the client-based or the Windows 10 or 11-based multi-session, yeah, it's a whole different beast. And from a performance perspective and a resource utilization, it's a very much of a daily changing beast, it feels like, right? I mean, with Windows Server 2016, 2019, RDSH was just a given. We knew how to size it and all this stuff, but the behaviors with a client-based operating system, that you're getting things like the application registration, AppX services, that prepare the environment as well as kind of make sure that it's staying up to date. So, you have all of these services that are being kind of issued on logon. And it's interesting to see how Microsoft is changing that to, okay, sometimes they're on log on, sometimes they're on log off. I'm seeing this whole balance of power utilization shift from the beginning to the end, and so that they can kind of make this a better situation for people just logging into these. So not only is it a different beast, but it's this constantly changing beast when we're talking about those. You don't see them much outside of Azure, right? Because it's mostly an AVD thing. But it is very, very different, and that's basically what I spend every day of my life doing for the last 2 or 3 years, is evaluating how they're changing and how you can optimize them. So yeah.
Is multi-session desktop operating system a puppy no one wanted, but we got anyway, right? Like, I know we wanted it because we wanted application compatibility to work, right? Because the server operating system was like, this application's like, but we all, in so many cases, that was like still a minority, like a 10% or less, were applications we couldn't double click on a server operating system and get them happy and dancing. But then now we've got it, and it's an option, but it's an option that only runs in this location, only with these specific rules. And to your point, it's a different beast that's changing. Like every, I guess, Windows update, I mean, between you and Josh, between WinRow 3 and Login VSI, everyone probably, even Jarian on the Nutanix side, because all their integration with the cloud, everyone has to pause for a second. Like, is this going to hurt us? Is this going to help us? Right? Like, I don't know, because it's month to month. Whereas those server operating systems that we've been using for 30 years have been like bulletproof. I mean, they've been tanks. Like, yes, if it doesn't work, it's okay, sorry. But if it worked, it was just like ramming speed, like no big deal. We didn't have to think about it as much. So I don't know. It's that I always, every time I hear the multi-session Windows 10 stuff, I'm just like, is that something we really wanted? But we've got it now. It's another option, but I don't know.
It's last I talked with Microsoft, I think it was about 90% of their SKUs in AVD. So obviously you can do any version of Windows 10, Windows 11, even Windows 7 in the past, but also server-based operating systems, and 90% of them are Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session.
Wow. Yeah, and I get that. That's where it comes in. It's just so much changing, and now we throw. I thought Windows 10, we were just going to run this thing for, like 5 or 10 more years, but now we've got Windows 11. So, I mean, are we seeing any of that? I mean, I know, Blair, you are for sure, but, Josh, I'm wondering if you're already seeing people that are like, hey, I need to test if the application will even work in Windows 11, let alone the performance impact.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of organizations that are in that assessment phase now, right? Because of the new TPM and all the stuff Windows 11 brings. And we're just starting to get used to kind of the H1, H2 update cycles as well, right? And now we have some new core functionality. But just to go back to the earlier point, and now specifically if we're looking at moving to something like ADD, a lot of the times that could be a driver. Well, let's assess Windows 11 at the same time. It's going to be a net new image, and then we sprinkle in the multi-session, right? So what it's doing is just adding additional complexities, if you will, because it's all brand new. Right. So again, the importance in that planning phase is stronger than ever, because one, skill sets, and you don't know until you know, right? So be a very long process, only to stall out and then backtrack to what the current delivery is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a good point, because I know every time there is a opportunity to move something on-prem to the cloud, and or go from this version to that version, it's like you might as well bring a new operating system along, because you're going to put the same amount of effort in, right? It's like remodeling the bathroom. It's going to take the same amount of effort to yank everything out, put everything back in, put the new towel, grout it, all that. So, I mean, I think probably remodeling a bathroom and building a Windows image is probably very similar in the effort, because sometimes you pull the tile off and then you're like, oh, okay, we should be good. Though those studs are rotted because it's been leaking this whole time. This application has been just like hanging on by a registry thread, and it's like, who built it last time? I don't know. That was 10 years ago. So,
yeah, that one developer who left the company, who we don't touch it, so we still have some really old legacy version of Citrix back there, because we don't want to upgrade it and we don't know how to change operating system or reinstall the application.
Don't look back there. Don't look back there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. Windows, we put that thing in its own VLAN. It's okay. Windows 2003 is all right? Don't worry about it. Yeah.
I had that with a customer running MetaFrame 1.8 XP or MetaFrame 1.8 on Windows 2000, and I was doing a 5.0 migration for him. Okay. And it was like, don't touch it, just leave it back there. We don't know the developer's at, we don't know the code's at. We'll just,
There was a bunch of people, especially I think it was like the NT 2000, 2003, that era of the OS, there was so much just leave it alone. Like, don't even put a MetaFrame cumulative update on there, a roll up, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen. It's just not worth it. Don't even put a patch on it for Microsoft. Just leave it alone.
Yeah, most of the time it was, we've got new developers, we're building a brand new application, we'll address it when it's done. Just let this go until the wheels fall off.
Yeah. Yeah, and in like the consulting game, it's like, I want to help fix all the things, but it's like, okay, all right, but you learn later in the consulting game, like, it's better to leave it alone. Just like, okay, just do your thing.
I think one of the things that's been real interesting for us is any new operating system nowadays is moving at like light speed. You know, how much has been refactored, how much is, you know, consistent with the older version, and we're seeing so much refactoring happen, and it's happening so much more often, right? So hence the testing and things like that you want to do. But I mean, we're even getting applications that are changing, like Teams, for example, right? That you've got optimized, non-optimized, all different types of quality, and they're changing the Teams app almost on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, like, we're actually getting the vendors that provide these services who are saying, well, we're not sure how this new OS is going to work with this application in this space because they're all so different. We just want to test it, right? And they're basically using Login VSI to do that, to say, okay, hey, if we take this user set, put it on this new, you know, use case with this operating system, this application, how are they going to work? Because we have no evidence from our history that's going to say how it's going to work. So the only way to find out is to test the current, right? And I find that with so many of the things that are coming out lately.
Well, I would agree, because, you know, and I know Jarian has too, because we've both worked a lot in healthcare too, is the operating system and Epic version this or Cerner version this and McKesson version that has been so static because the operating system release tempo was 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
And now we're having such major updates between just H1, H2 twice a year, plus you throw in a Windows 11 and a couple updates there. Like, it's just so fast, and it makes me think that there's almost no way, like, any modern application vendor just has to be like, we tested it on 21H2 and it worked, and that's as far as we can go. We'll wait till next year to find out what the new hotness is, because we just can't test 10 OSs every single release cycle, right?
Well, and then add on Citrix too, right? If you're on the current list of Citrix, you know, every quarter you're doing a new infrastructure, a new VDA. If you're running on Citrix Cloud and you're not on the LTSR train, that's a new VDA as well. So all those flavors are in the mix, and that's why we use Login VSI for our internal performance testings. Every time Windows changes, AOS, AHV, vSphere, even Citrix. But after a while, we said, you know what? We can only standardize on LTSR and cumulative releases, because the Windows OS release was getting so much faster that we couldn't keep up with all that in our team. So
yeah, because I mean, it's just, we're getting like too many flavors of ice cream. Like, it's Baskin Robbins has gone out of control. Like, more than 31 operating systems is too much.
Yeah, it's like you go to those new frozen yogurt shops that you get to pick all the flavor, all the stuff, and they weigh you at the end. That's pretty much what's going on now, is that you have that whole buffet of toppings and flavors and sauces, and you're trying to mix that up, but you're trying to stay within a certain pound. That's what basically it is today.
Yeah. You're trying to stuff it in the cup, right? Like as long as it doesn't fall out.
Yeah, and then when you weigh it, you want the small size, not the large size.
Yeah. So what do we think on this? Is a good one. It's one of those big ones. But what do we think the industry's baseline is for what an end user should expect in terms of performance and experience? I know from what I've seen from the olden days, everyone had like 60-second log-ons, and then we got them down to 30, and then like 20-ish is good, 10 is excellent, and beyond 10, you pretty much have hacked the matrix, right? Like, whatever profile solution, whatever personalization, whatever group policies are most likely baked in, hard-coded, mandatory profiles, no change for you. But it seems like right now, even in the cloud, I'm seeing like 20, 30 seconds is normal. For most clients, big and small, but I mean, what are we seeing, and what should people expect, you know?
I think if you're sub 30, go ahead, Blair, sorry.
No, go for it, Jarian.
I say if you're, you know, in sub 30, sub 20, you know, I think you're in a good range. If you're above 30 though, you know, I think that's when you start looking at things. Because for example, look at with some of these solutions that don't support the synchronous processing of policy. Yep. And that's where you have to have something like like WEM or somebody else that does it differently, especially if we're doing any kind of client-side extensions that can impact that logon. So you might have to look at some kind of tool like WEM or another contextual type tool, so you can apply things with an agent and based on certain conditions instead of slamming everything in at logon.
Yep.
Yeah, from my perspective, 20 seconds to 30 seconds is a sweet spot. But I think more than anything, when it comes to a user population, consistency, it becomes almost more important,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So if I do have to survive a 45-second login, it's best if it stays that way. If it goes to 60 sometimes, or if it goes down to 20, right? Then as a user, I'm like, oh, well, it was 20 yesterday, it should be 20 next time, right? So consistency is a really important part of I think the expectations that we have when it comes to logins, because on a day-to-day basis, we're not spending most of our times, with the logins. It's more about the user experience, which I think is, we all have this very skewed perspective and expectation because we have phones in our hand every day that respond a lot faster than our desktops, right? So
Yep.
it's almost like I expect that desktop to respond as quickly as my phone does, right? So that's my piece on that.
Yeah, Josh, because I mean, I think where y'all come in is, does it work? And then how good is it when it gets there, right? Like the login time is probably something y'all see just a glimmer of, but you probably see more of, does it work and how fast it launch kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. We look at the application itself in isolation. So not, what Blair in the user experience, we don't focus so much on that, but we're looking at exactly that. Well, these core components that make up the application, that change the operating system, what does their performance impact look like? And then compare it against what their baseline is today, what they're used to.
Yep.
Again, to determine very quickly and early that needle out of the haystack, should there be something fundamentally wrong with the change that you've introduced, you can catch that very proactively.
Right. And I think that's good though, because I think we're all saying around that 20 to 30-second mark. And if you're listening to this webinar right now and you're above that consistently, you go into Director and you're looking at trends, or even if you're VMware and you're in VROPS looking at it, or Control Up or whoever, or Goliath, if they were here too, just taking a gander at that, because there's probably an opportunity to change some profile settings, group policy settings, and other login related things to get you into that spot, so that you can be, kind of disappear into there. So you're not this one that's like, 60, 90, 100. And I've seen that. I think where I see the most fluctuation in login times, even in good deployments, is people that do persistent desktops. And that's because in many cases, those persistent desktops, they're still giving them admin rights and they get to do what they want. And that's not a flavor that's supported. And so they're like, hurting themselves literally, based on how they do that. And so I guess that's a good one too. I know this would be, I know I see a lot of people that suggest a good proactive monitoring tool for end users in VDI responsiveness, slowness issues. I know we've got Login VSI with their solution beyond just like load testing. And then we have Goliath and Control Up, Liquidware. I mean, there's a whole pile of them, and
Even
each
Director
one
gives you some.
Yeah, and Director is going to give you a good amount, like a whole lot more than back in the day, right? Like, but I think that one really depends on what you want to see and how you want to see it. So I mean, what do we all think on that? Like, how do we see how performance is? I know what Blair's answer to this, Login VSI for the win, right?
Well, then, since you teed it up for me, no, no, it's one of those things where, man, lost my train of thought, was thinking about something different. I'm going to pass this one off.
Well, so I'll start off then real quick. So, to start with, look what you can do with the built-in pieces, right? Look at Director, and then if you have such as Cloud, tie that into performance analytics, because that will also help you get a good picture and also give you some things to look at user experience and so forth. And then as you start requiring more things or more insights that the product doesn't fill out of the box, look at Logon Enterprise, look at other products, look at Goliath, Control Up, Uber Agent. There's no things out there, but then it goes back to your requirements too. Do you just want monitoring? Do you want any kind of built-in actionable troubleshooting? What are your requirements? Do you want just a monitoring tool, or do you want more like a help desk type where I can do actions or script-based actions type of tools as well?
Yeah, and I think a lot of those tools also just started in like the EUC VDI space. But then so many of them have grown to monitor all the things, right? Whereas we have always thought for a while, obviously SolarWinds has had like a bad run over the last little bit, but it was kind of the industry standard of like ping all the things, green or red, have a great day, right? Like, oh, okay, I got an email, something's broke. So, but now we've realized that that's just pinging something is good and valuable, but knowing how it truly is performing for the users and services that are running, because if it's pinging, that's cool, but if the SQL service isn't running, the database isn't working, right? So it's like,
you want some kind of root cause analysis type thing too. And you made a good point there. Do you want something that's a point solution to just your VDI DAS environment, or do you want something more holistic that can be used across the enterprise as well?
Yep.
Yeah, I think a big component of any type of proactive monitoring is that you have a consistent baseline, or if what do we expect and then what are we getting, right? And I think there's a couple of things that come along with that. If you're kind of purely watching production users, right? Humans behave differently day to day, right? Which is why we do our proactive solution with these synthetic or virtual users or robotic users, right? They perform the same way every day, every time. So if you have a baseline and that baseline shifts, you're not asking yourself, did my user community do something different that may have caused that, right? And then because we're kind of watching it from the top of the stack, basically meaning, infrastructure all the way up to endpoint, we're watching it from that target, from that endpoint perspective. So typically, if you get a shift in that baseline, that's going to mean like one of my components in this stack, in that multi-layer yogurt, tree that Yaron was talking about, right? Something is going to change and something is going to throw us off. But if you can kind of see what changed, was it just an application? Was it a logon? Was it a database lookup? Typically you can catch, by looking at it from the top down, you can catch, okay, it was this query that they did, it took twice as long as usual. Okay, let's look at the database real quick. Let's look at the app real quick. So I think that baseline and then kind of understanding how things change from a static usage perspective really helps you to figure that proactive piece out quick.
Also, too, to add to is the baseline thing too. Anytime you introduce change to the environment, you always want to get a new baseline, new patching, new application version, new OS, new Citrix version. Any one of those small changes can impact your existing baseline. So you just want to make sure that you test and get a new baseline so you know where your new starting point is from, not your old starting original point is from.
I got a question from Jared, who's been in the APAC with very large deployments like those 25,000 seats, has been moving, had a lot of people working to get to Citrix and AWS, but since being back in the States for the past 2 years, seeing a bunch of conversations about AVD from large enterprise clients, and are we seeing this as well? And I know for me, it is because, Microsoft holds the keys to their licensing agreement and where Microsoft Office is allowed to run. And it's like wherever Microsoft Office is allowed to run is where people will kind of have to go. It's the productivity of Office, application of choice. Like Libra is cool, but I know a lot of people that have to put it in their virtual desktop image so that they can open up docs and edit things and do stuff, but they just can't pay that Microsoft tax for maybe non-employee users that access their system and stuff like that, right? So, but yeah, I've seen AVD really getting talked up a lot, and I think it's because it's the native solution, right? It's like they got Xbox, and hey, let's go ahead and get our desktop there too.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. Lots of interest in AVD, lots of questions about should I include Citrix or should I go native, right? And I think that comes back to the point you were talking about was, in this control plane, do you want all of the benefits that come with Citrix, right? In terms of being able to provision, manage images and things like that, or do you want to kind of rough it yourself and kind of make the stack a little thinner? Even from a Microsoft sales perspective, we're seeing they're bouncing back and forth between the two options as well. So
Exactly.
definitely, yeah.
And so there's new announcements too. They just improve some of that stuff for AVD as well with their AVD optimization pack type stuff. So
well, and I think that's the most interesting thing. And I know Jarian with Nutanix is everyone for I guess 5+ years, 10 years has been like Nutanix is the hardware and a hypervisor. But then over the past less than 5 years, with the acquisition of Frame on top of all the cloud development you've done, that y'all have definitely changed into a software VDI and even backup DR regular computing company, and kind of really changed your whole thing. And when I look at some of these questions and we talking about where stuff needs to run and then AVD, then it always, every time I hear AVD, I always hear Nerdio, right? Because and it's like we have to control costs, and like AVD was released ramming speed in some ways because it had so many features that everybody had that they didn't, and now we're coming back. And with what you're saying with Citrix and what y'all have done with AVD and where you can run stuff in their cloud in Azure and your workloads, it kind of changes the game, because you got to be able to save some costs. You can't just have these desktops on all the time, because then you're just going to burn your wallet. So we got Donovan here, new Citrix admin here. Are home labs a thing of the past? I don't think so. I think the good thing is now some of those things are cheaper, and yes, it's going to be expensive to have a fancy one, but even a single Intel NUC with a little 1-2 terabyte hard drive, 32, 64 gigs of RAM, you can run a whole little world in there. Won't be fast, but the things that I think are the most valuable is those upgrades, right? Those, you're on 1912 LTSR, you're trying to go to 2203, like double click, next, explosions. Okay, cool. That server, next server, so that you can be comfortable with it and also see what those feature differences are. Because we're talking about monitoring, Citrix Director has added all kinds of stuff. And so if you're on older versions and you're like, Citrix Director is lame, some of the newer versions are getting better. Like, yep. Yes, it's bundled, it's free, but it's okay. But yeah, I think you definitely still valuable to have. And then what's outside of Citrix e-learning, so what do we got for this? So labs and how to learn more on Citrix.
So yeah, labs, and what really, I guess, defines what a home lab is today, because a lot of people are moving, it's still their home lab, but they're using cloud instances as well. And you're seeing with some of the community programs or Microsoft, depending on some of your licensing or whatever program you're part of, you get cloud credits as well for Azure. So they've kind of shifted some of that stuff. And then just look at things like, learning. Of course, there's e-learning, there's the forums, there's labs, there's the World of EUC community as well, that I'm in with a bunch of people out in the community to help each other out. So there's always ways to learn, reach out to others in the community, attend some of these virtual events or in-person ones as they start coming back. There's always that networking aspect. CUGC site for the longest time as well, their forums and being able to post blogs on there. So there's all those kinds of resources, and stay tuned for more coming as well.
Yep, I agree. See our next one here. Oh, here we go. Yeah, this is a good one. This is back from Jared here. Anyone here use PVS on Azure yet?
I have not used it, but I'll tell you that my focus has been more on PVS in the cloud in general, and that's something that we can do whether it's Azure or AWS, because of our clusters, our cloud clusters product, that runs native AHV on bare metal nodes in the cloud. So I've been more focused on that than actually using the native Azure. I can tell you the differences though if you want, but yeah, that's where my focus has been for as far as PVS in the cloud.
Yeah, I've only seen a couple people test it. I haven't seen it used beyond that. I mean, so it's just barely still testing.
I think the only thing I'll kind of contribute to that is that when you do test PVS in the cloud or are considering moving it to Azure or something like that, pay attention to how it's configured, and because the last thing you want to do is configure it differently for the cloud. For example, how do I configure storage, things like that, and then expect them to work the same, right? And then when you expect them to work the same and they don't, you're like, well, yep, Azure's garbage, right? Well, no, you've got to consider how it's been set up and what some of the differences are going to be. So if you are considering PVS on Azure, definitely make sure that you're comparing like to like, or that you're considering some of the changes that you get when you go to a cloud-based solution.
Yeah, because even the OS support's different. There's only certain, they have to be Gen 2 VMs support. The boot type is different. That's all different from on-prem. You can't just take your on-prem image and move it to PVS. You know, they do have the image portability servers that can help you with that, but you can't don't expect the same exact workflow that you have, like Blair was saying, on-prem that you have in the cloud. Otherwise, yeah, your experience is not going to be good.
Yep. Josh, here's one here for you. How do I make sure my apps work before you start this migration to the cloud or just to there? Can we talk about a little bit about how Remo 3 can help make that a little more better?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all about automation, right? Traditionally, the only way to do it is, as we kind of mentioned before, is that manual effort, right? Let's go ahead, create our new cloud image, let's install apps and sit there and see what happens, right? But the problem with that, one, it's very costly and time consuming, but two, there's when we're starting to adopt these new technologies, right? We use AVD, for example. We addressed multi-session a little bit, adds that complexity. For those of you that are familiar with the modernized application packaging format like MSIX, putting those two together, right? That's where, you know, being able to test that holistically, automation is the way to go. Because one, you can do that in batch and at scale. So what we've seen previously is, you know, you pick 5 applications. Sure, 5 applications are no problem, right? You can manually invest the time for that. But when we look in a real world situation, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of applications, right? So again, that automation and not to beat it down, it is extremely key, because the other point as well, and we touched on it a little bit, but I may be looking to go to point A to point B as it relates to my applications, but I'm selling myself short. If I have invested in an automated solution, I'm selling myself short, not investigating other deployment methods in parallel. Because again, it's a click of a button, or it's the cost of compute now. So if I am looking at, let's say, AVD again, Windows 10 multi-session, why not add Windows 11 in there as well? And while I'm doing that, why not look for, you know, things like MSIX or app attach suitability, or, you know, and that could be applied to anything, whether it's, you know, Citrix, whether it's VMware, whatever that control plane is moving. You have the ability now with the great tooling to investigate all of those or explore all of those with essentially the same amount of effort, right? And again, if you're doing that up front, you know where the problem childs are, you can resource that, you know, and still accelerate the successes through the project.
Yep. Yeah, I think to Josh's point, automation is like key because of the changes and all of that stuff. But the reason why I like how complementary Remo 3 is with Login VSI is that Remo really does a great job of kind of setting the foundation when it comes to the applications, right? You got your image, and then every app that you stick on top of that image and automatically test with Remo 3, you know it's going to be like in lockstep. It's a solid foundation. And then what you could do is take that one step beyond that, also from an automated perspective, because that's how you know, Remo 3 works. They automate a lot. Login VSI automates a lot, but take this solid foundation where Remo 3 has made sure that each app is just solid on this image. Then you kind of want to mix all of the apps together and have them run together, right? So you take this solid foundation with Remo 3, and then on top of that, you layer the Login Enterprise solution on top of that to make sure that all of these apps work in concert with each other, you know, all the way through the stack. So automating any type of new image changes, things like that, is the only way to go nowadays. It's the only way to keep up.
The other point, and it just kind of occurred to me, Blair, when you were talking, is the common denominator, right? The complementary aspect is that both Login VSI and Remo 3, it's your applications on your images, which is extremely important, right? We get in-house developed, you know, typically the skill set's there, they know that down to the source code. But when we get into the world of COTS, the commercial, right? Is it, or, you know, it may say, yes, we support this version, but again, that's based off of that ISV's version of that image, right? That isn't with your Citrix layered on, your security posture layered on, right? GPOs, all of that stuff is vitally important and needs to be included, not just will it run? Will it run with my, you know, contextual configurations within this environment?
Yep. Oh yeah, and I mean, this stuff is so dynamic now, like we've talked about. The tempo of everything is going so much faster. When we talk about the operating systems, the options for the operating system between single, multi-session, and then applications trying to run on those. It's becoming more difficult. So without the right tools, the job is getting actually harder, even though we're supposed to be going, I guess, still paperless sometime, any day now. It's going to happen.
And then still trying to figure out those applications too, because you're still running a single core and single-threaded and multi-threaded applications as well. And so you're thinking, okay, what kind of hardware do I need? You look at the GPU applications. Lots of the GPU applications are still single-threaded applications. So that's what comes into play. Do I need more cores, or do I need higher clock speed, or do I need a balance of both because I'm running both types of applications? So even testing the application, but understanding how the applications work in terms of performance is key as well.
Yeah, and I mean that dovetails into this next one here, which is as in the consulting world, it depends, right? But it says, what is the best method or best tools for capacity planning when designing a new VDI solution? And I know Microsoft Excel has always been my friend. I know that Login VSI, Liquidware, and a couple others have things that can help do the capacity planning by looking at what's running now, multiplying times 1,000 users, if that's our standard baseline, and saying you need this. But I think the one thing that's changing now that I think is the hardest part, and I know I only see it kind of on the community blogs, is we used to just say we had 2 vCPU, 4 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of RAM on the server, or a terabyte on the server, you can get this many people. CPUs, whatever, or CPUs more important depending on the applications, and you just multiplied it out. Well, now we have to go to the cloud and we have to pick a flavor of ice cream. We have to pick a E2 V3, a D2 V4, right? And that's a price that sticks with you every second of the day, and then every desktop or server per month. So that cost, this is where we've seen, back when we had all the synergies and stuff, we've always had all those kind of good Dan Feller topics and stuff like that, where they would do some of the performance testing, and Martin, where it was more cores and have fewer RDS servers and more users on it, saved you more money per month. So now it's not just like how much can you stuff on a server, which instance is the best one to do. And I just don't think there's like an overarching best tool, because the mileage varies too much. But what are we thinking?
It also depends too on the hardware factor as well, right? Intel versus AMD. What flavor are those? Either whether it's in your data center or it's in the cloud, what flavor are those CPUs? Because you look at some of those, like for example, you can still get older generation CPUs in the cloud, so that could actually impact your density to make it lower than what you're seeing today. Or you get some instances that are newer processors that will get you better density, or the whole Intel versus AMD argument, where you're seeing the AMD processors where you're getting all kinds of density on an instance or a node or whatever, and you're more talking about failure domains versus users or desktops per node. So it all depends on those factors as well. So it does go back to that question, that whole consulting answer. It depends. But there are tools out there, always do POCs, always test your workloads, go through and do that. And that way you can kind of see how it forms, use automation, to kind of mimic those workloads, like record those workflows and then replay those out there. That way you can get that kind of density and that testing out there. So all those things will come into play. We still even do that on premises hardware as well. And we still go through that every time something changes. So there's still some of the same methodology behind it. It's just you're kind of just refactoring that for the cloud.
Yeah, good stuff. Great points. I think the baseline, I always come back to a baseline. Anytime that you're doing any kind of capacity planning, you got to know, where am I coming from? We're not doing greenfield with VDI or RDSH solutions anymore. We pretty much know where we're coming from. So knowing the baseline, there are also too many choices out there for what can I put this new solution on. So yeah, that's tough. There is more community kind of information that helps us to choose that, but I think it's ultimately becoming up to us on what we choose. I will say that the latest product or the latest update that we've had in Login Enterprise does have a capacity planning feature. So if you take Yarian's point about, hey, you got to understand what their workflow is, take that workflow, pop it into Login Enterprise, fire it at the solution that you're kind of interested in learning more about from a capacity perspective, and we have what we call VSI Max 2. in that in our solution Login Enterprise, where it'll ramp up and it will find that knee in the curve where user experience starts to go bad, right? So at least you have a good place to know, okay, this many sessions on this solution is actually that sweet spot. So we do give some assistance in finding that.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we're all going to see. The more like VDA / user workloads in the cloud and picking the right flavor, but also as the cloud gets busier, what things are going to start happening, right? So like we're still, I guess, in the VDI EUC world, we're still kind of in the infancy. When there's millions and millions of user sessions in a VDI broker somewhere around the world, still in a data center near you, right? And there's hundreds of thousands still going to the cloud, but then as more and more go, will it be able to keep up? Because that was always the thing why VDI in RDS had its own cluster. It had its own thing because then we could control, right? There's no other database server, application server, file server, domain controller, random things going on there. It's only users executing application ABCD, right? And when you're in the cloud, you're running beside all kinds of stuff and all the hosts, and you have no visibility. And I think that's where like Nutanix and some of your solutions is getting to the cloud, but still having that better visibility and some of the control with some of the solutions y'all have. But like that's my fear, is that, you know, we talked about it very early that we haven't seen a lot of people abandon ship from the cloud because there's not enough people that have really got there. But that's what I see maybe like 5 years, is that people will be like, the performance is just not consistent enough. And we talked about that too. If that login time is 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 60, 60, 60, 30, 30, 30, 60, 60, 90, 90, 30, 30, 60, and it's just a spread every day the user comes on. And if that's just the login time, we know on the Remo 3 side and your side with Login VSI is that application launch time is going to vary just as much too, right? If your login time is swinging that much on any solution, your user performance of the actual application is going to vary too.
So that cloud consistency you're talking about is one thing that we can help with from a clusters it was renamed cloud clusters perspective, because we're using dedicated instances, we're using bare metal instances. And so you're running that same number of instances, same number of users per node. So we can do that whether it's in Azure, AWS today, or on-prem. And then also from a capacity standpoint, if you go that route, we have a Prism Central product, which also can do some capacity runway as well to tell you you have X amount of days or whatever before you run out of compute or memory or storage. So if you want consistency in the cloud, that's something that we can kind of do with our cloud cluster solution.
Yep. All right, sweet. Let's see. We got that one. Yeah, so this one's kind of fun. What is the best way to test these products? And I guess these products would be, are we talking about just Login VSI, Remo 3, Goliath, the Nutanix things? If your organization's cybersecurity team frowns upon non-essential environments, which I think is really non-essential applications, where they say like no one's executing the Login VSI agent or the Remo 3 agent to do this, why are we putting something on our image that can then be hack the planet? I guess I don't know. That one's a tough question. What are we thinking?
I can easily answer from Nutanix perspective real quick. So we have POC stuff you can do. We have our community edition you can run. If you want to check out cloud clusters in AWS, I did a demo about bursting. We actually have a web-based walkthrough that you can do that basically mimics the whole thing I did without actually having to do any kind of credits in AWS or any kind of financial commitment, where you can just walk through. Also, there's an email you sign up for, and you can walk through that whole process of replicating your base image, starting off with building the cluster in AWS, deploying it, replicating your base image, and then going through the virtualized and desktops workflow of deploying that image using MCS. So that's an easy one for me to answer.
Yeah, I think the operative word there is non-essential environments. So does that mean kind of a dev environment is separate from my production environment or what? But if I take it from that perspective, we do see that a lot, where a customer will say, hey, I don't have this non-production test environment that I can, try all of these new changes in. So the best case, some of the customers that have run into that situation have had a DR solution that would, kind of have this active passive scenario where you can test in this passive, site under certain conditions. So that's always an option. And then the cloud, you can always spin something up that's a separate tenant or something like that. So there's some options there.
Yeah, same on our end. The nice part of the world of Remo 3 is it doesn't take much, right? Essentially, we need applications as well as the operating environment. So, for validation exercises, very flexible deployment options, right? We can run it all to offload all of that, right? We can do a hybrid approach. So, again, it's really around what are those restrictions, and we will map best that we can towards those.
Yep. All right.
Yeah,
well,
don't overlook using cloud for some of those things too, like was mentioned,
exactly.
because that's outside of your data center. It doesn't necessarily have to be connected back to your environment through a VNet or a VPC, using VPN, that kind of stuff. You can actually make that in its own bubble, not have to worry about impacting your production security environment as well.
Yep. All right. Well, we're getting the last question. And I think the last question that I want to do for the three of you is, what is the newest, coolest thing that your product / company does that someone might not know about right now? Because we've talked a whole lot about DAS and all these capabilities. We've dovetailed a bunch of stuff in, but I think that's always kind of a fun one, is what's the newest, coolest thing that's come out? Because one thing that's happened, we still don't have like the conferences, where we're yapping and we're all like hanging out, and so sometimes it's really hard for us to figure those things out, because it's like all we're doing is seeing a press release, and it's like we're just bombarded with stuff all the time. So what's the newest, coolest thing at each one of y'all's places?
I'll take the first. We just released actually 3 new functions with our 4.8 release. Number one, I spoke to it earlier, which is capacity planning, this automated way of finding how much capacity your solution has. Number 2, we actually have an EUX score, so this end user experience score, kind of from the days of Windows 7 when you used to be able to hop into your computer properties and it would give you this score on how cool is my computer, how fast is it. So we have that, and then we also just released our new knowledge worker. It's an out-of-the-box workflow that you can include in your testing that will use Office, Edge, and you can even throw in apps like Teams and things like that. So it's out of the box. You don't have to script it or anything. So those 3 things are our latest release.
Cool.
So I guess I'll go next. So one recently announcement that it's more recent, but it's not like hot recent, is that our announced partnership with Citrix. So we're their preferred private cloud vendor for infrastructure for Citrix. They're our preferred EUC solution on top of our infrastructure, and we have a bi-weekly co-engineering meeting and a joint roadmap that we're working on together. That is one thing that I'm involved in. So that's one. 2, I keep talking about our cloud clusters, where AWS has been our main one for the past, I think, 2 years. That's been out there in the public. We are just on the doorstep of public preview for Azure as well. So it's really getting that multi and hybrid cloud scenario out there. And then 2, for our disaster recovery as a service product, we will be having a new plugin integration with Citrix dropping here any day now as well. So if you are running our DR as a service product, formerly known as Xi, we will have full support for Citrix DAS here pretty soon, where in the past we only had support for virtual apps and desktops.
Cool.
What I'll mention is the ability to run the Remo 3 intelligent smoke test under a multi-session user context. So all of that automated unattended greatness that we're currently doing, we're now doing it in the context of multi-session and providing those results out, just as well as just strengthening the easy button to be able to deploy the Remo 3 solution within your environment for that contextual relevance piece. Simplifying that every release that it comes, so it's fully automated.
Awesome. Yeah, that's some cool stuff. And I mean, that's the thing. That's why we have these types of things, is so people can understand and learn about all these different solutions and how a lot of these things on the same call, they all dovetail together, right? For user experience monitoring, flexibility, testing, and knowing if an application is going to work, how good is it working, and then where in the world is it running, right? So But yeah, thank y'all all for your time. I know we're a couple minutes over, and if you can see here, Stephanie just posted the XL for Kansas City. It's gonna be lit, I think is the appropriate term, right? It's been a while, and I hope everyone has a good, safe trip there, because I know it's gonna be a hoot.
Yeah,
Well,
next month. So coming out and enjoy Kansas City. I'll be there.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to show the slide deck and it jumped over to a goofy.
It got antsy in its pantsy. It had too much
did.
stuff this
There we
morning.
go.
There
It
you
was
go.
so excited about, there you go. So there's the speakers, our agenda, like lots of great stuff. So you don't have to be in Kansas City. You can certainly travel to Kansas City. Ooh, that's a thing. People are traveling. So definitely join us out in Kansas City. I think it's going to be really fun. I'm very excited. I haven't been to a live CUGC event in quite some time.
I mean, the last one was the Houston XL, right? I mean,
I
like
think so.
in
And I
person,
didn't get to
like
go to
that
that
February. I know we missed you there.
Yep, I didn't make the cut on that one. But thank you all. I really appreciate you guys being on this webinar today. I think it seems like you guys had a lot of fun. I think these discussions are really great for CUGC members. They're, you guys can just talk freely, and I think they're a lot of fun. So hopefully everybody else enjoyed it as well. I know some of you may have opted in for a chance to win a $150 Amazon gift card. So how that works is, as soon as I close out the webinar today, I'll pull the registration report and I'll use a number randomizer to choose a winner, and then I will let you know if you won. But you can also follow us on Twitter. We'll announce it out there as well. So stay tuned. All right, so thank you so much, Blair, Jarian, Josh, and Patrick. Really glad to have you on today. Glad you guys could do it.
Hey, my pleasure.
All right, Patrick, I'm going to release you to the Masters Retreat and the Spring Breakers.
Tell everybody we said hi out there, Patrick.
We will. We will.
Everyone enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
thank you.
Have a good day.